Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Green Light for Grants interview series presented by the Community Sector Council of Nova Scotia with support from the Community Health Boards of Nova Scotia. This series is about helping community-based organizations across Nova Scotia prepare better grant submissions by giving them an opportunity to hear from the grantors themselves. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Mi'kmaq, the traditional or ancestral unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. My name is Joel Stoddard, and with me today is Jill Chappell. Jill is the Marketing and Communications Lead with the Mental Health Foundation of Nova Scotia. Welcome, Jill.
Thanks, Joel, for having me.
Excellent. So I'd like to get right into things here, and so best for me to pass it over to you. And if you could tell us and all the audience a little bit about the Mental Health Foundation, what you do, and sort of your origin story, that'd be great.
Sure. So the Mental Health Foundation of Nova Scotia is a registered charity, and we aim to increase financial support to community initiatives that provide hope and eradicate the stigma surrounding mental illness and addiction. So our mission is to make a difference in the lives of Nova Scotians who live with mental illness and addiction and their loved ones in their circle of support. So our vision is ultimately to see Nova Scotians who live with mental illness and addiction thriving in our communities. So they have that support system, the programs and services they need right in their own community to continue living a healthy, productive life.
Awesome. And you're located, you're sort of headquartered in Halifax, or?
That's right. Well, we are in the Halifax region. We're actually located right at the Nova Scotia Hospital. So it's a great place to be because we're embedded with a bunch of amazing people, and we also get to see firsthand, a lot of people who are living with mental illness, who come into the hospital, who receive treatment, and who ideally leave and go into the community and live a healthy life.
Well, it's certainly a great place to be located, and but you cover all of Nova Scotia, right? I mean, you're headquartered in HRM, but you have outreach presumably in other parts of the province, or how does that work?
Right. Yeah, Joel, so our office is based in Halifax at the Nova Scotia Hospital in Dartmouth, Woodside area. But, as many people these days, we are all working from different parts. We do still make sure that the office is staffed. However, a lot of us are working from home. But as you mentioned, the outreach really is provincial. So our goal is to distribute the funds that we raise throughout Nova Scotia from one end of the province to the other. And I can actually say that, we have distributed funds all the way from Freeport, all the way out on Digby Neck, all the way up to, I guess, furthest east would probably be like the Sydney area.
Wow. So certainly a provincial impact for sure. And when did I was looking at your website, and I think I've sort of concluded that the foundation started in about 2006, or am I off on that, or is that about right?
Well, in 2006, you're correct. The Mental Health Foundation was sort of rebranded. So it's a reimagining of what was once the Nova Scotia Hospital Foundation. So the focus of the Mental Health Foundation is really more to provide funding in the community, because we want to see that those support systems, those services, those programs, right where people are living, so they can stay they can stay at home, they can be surrounded by their friends, their loved ones, those people that help them every day, while still being able to get access to whether it's counseling or peer support or any sort of system that they need to make sure that they are able to stay on track with their recovery, or in some cases, identify that there is something going on and have that support system right there when they need it to ensure that they don't have to go into the hospital, that they can have treatment right there in their own community.
Awesome. It's so interesting. I mean, so much has changed in the way that we talk about mental health since 2006. I mean, 14 years is a short window of time in the grand scheme of things, and it is hard to put your mind back there to how we sort of thought about it. And we obviously have a long way to go, but a lot has changed, and I'm sure your foundation has sort of been at the forefront of that, along with, I'm sure, many others. Can you tell us a little bit about some of you're a granting organization, you're a financially supportive organization. Can you tell us about some of your key grants or programs that you help people with?
Right. Well, our big program would be our community grant funding. And ideally, we do that twice a year. Now, this year was unfortunately a little bit different due to COVID. But essentially, what we do is we open up a granting program. So community organizations and individuals who have a mental health mandate can apply for funding up to $25,000. And we have an independent committee who reviews the applications, and then we decide on who gets what funding based on what's available in the pot.
That's a really great point. I mean, we talked about this a little bit before we hit the record button about sort of the independent committee, and I think that's one of the questions a lot of applicants have about, when they're submitting a grant to any organization is who makes this decision and how. And can you speak a little bit to that in terms of how the committee is comprised, or how you draw on different people in the community to sort of help make those balanced decisions?
Yeah, well, initially when all of those applications come in, our president and CEO reviews them first. So essentially she looks at all of the applications, make sure, number one, that they've been in on time. So that's the first criteria to meet. And then she goes through sort of a set list of criteria. Once they are vetted under that criteria, then they move on to the committee. So I can tell you a little bit about what that is. So does the submission align with the foundation's strategic direction? Will the submission assist in two of the following: building awareness, brand recognition for the Mental Health Foundation of Nova Scotia, building relationships, or stewardship? Then will the grant impact an appropriate number of people? Would the foundation's donors be supportive of funding this grant? And has attention been paid to the overall quality of the submission? Is there spelling, grammar, readability? Have people really put a lot of thought and effort into what they're doing? So once it makes it through that initial program, then it goes on to our grant selection committee. And so this is a committee of independent volunteers who are from basically from the business community and people who also understand, some clinicians who understand, mental health and I would say can sort of review the impact and the necessity of this type of programming. So they are responsible for ensuring that the decisions that we make are fair and unbiased, and that we're awarding the funds appropriately. And this is really important for our stewardship with our donors, so that they know that all of this is transparent. They can see what we're doing. It's not a friend of mine who's getting the funding, or if it is a friend of mine, I'm not somebody who has had any involvement in the decision at all. Not that I would necessarily but that there is no favoritism here. It's to make sure that we're putting forth the best programs, and we're also making sure that the funding is being spread out across the province, so that all of our communities are getting the support that they need. So community and business leaders throughout Nova Scotia review all of these, and again, there's a set criteria of what they look at, and all of this is on our website. So anybody who's applied before will know that it's there, but it's a great thing to review before you put in your submission. And so a lot of that, Joel, is similar to what I just mentioned with sort of the initial vetting process. But did you want me to go through each specific criteria?
If you think there are some key ones to go through, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally it would be similar to a lot of grant applications, but you need to, have your project objectives, your anticipated results, that's sort of the SMART goal setting, so we can see the evaluation process and how you intend to make an impact. Does the project address a unique need? Because that is something we're really looking is trying to see where there might be gaps in the mental health care system, and where we can put some funding to help improve that, to enhance the system that already exists, because it's taxed, and that's why we're here, is to support what's in place. What's in place is helpful, but there are a lot of other things that we can be doing. So we love the organizations and individuals who are out there who are trying to see where those gaps are and provide something to fill that. Let's get a
couple of quick questions as you speak there. Do you have to be a not-for-profit and or a charitable entity in order to apply, or can you be a community group or a loosely affiliated group of concerned citizens, or sort of what are the criteria in that regard?
You don't have to be a nonprofit. So we
Okay.
do have community groups. What it really comes down to, Joel, is that application process, you know, and it will be thoroughly vetted. So it could be a community group who is running, you know, a program, and one comes to mind that we have granted prior, and it's actually the Chester Municipal Heritage Society.
Okay.
And they run a program that pairs youth with seniors who are living with dementia.
Okay.
And together they have a choir, and they've created music videos, and it really supports the seniors who are living with dementia, other seniors in the area, and it eradicates the stigma surrounding dementia, because these young people are able to spend time with them, to learn about them, to learn about the mental illness that they're living with, and that is a good example of a community organization versus you know, a nonprofit.
Yeah. That's awesome. I mean, there's so many of these things that we hear about in our communities, and so many that we don't. I like to think that I know that region of the province reasonably well, and I had no idea that sort of existed. So there's so many interesting things going on, and you talked about sort of the diversity of different projects, and I think one of the things that I've always kind of thought with the term mental health is that it's cast a very wide net, and it's interpreted differently by a lot of people. But I like to think that's a good thing, in that you as a foundation can sort of, you know, keep a very open mind to what constitutes a mental health sort of project or initiative.
Yeah, that's right, Joel. I mean, there is a huge variety of programmings and support that has mental health in mind. So we can be talking about mental health and things that support our health and wellness, but you can also be talking about specific mental illness in general. So whether that's counseling or peer support could be eating disorders or depression or anxiety, you know, that's completely different from perhaps something that, you know, the one I mentioned earlier, which is like a music therapy program, which really supports your mental health, as opposed to specifically addressing a mental illness.
Awesome. Well, I'd like to talk a little bit about, you know, the application process and some of the things you like to see and don't, but I guess I'll front end that by asking, do you have a sense of how many applications would the foundation get in the run of a year?
That is a really good question. You know, it varies, Joel, from year to year, but what I can tell you is that number is increasing.
Yeah.
And we unfortunately don't have enough funds to be able to fund every project. So it is a competitive application process. And our goal is to fund as many as we can. We'd love to be able to fund them all. But, you know, there are a lot of needs in our community, and we just have to keep trucking and raising more money year over year.
I saw on your website you have I think there is a sort of a pie chart that talks about the amount fundraised and sort of vis-a-vis the goal, and I'm sure it certainly grows every year. And one of the questions I was going to ask you, and I know as we record this, we're sort of 6 months into the pandemic or thereabout. Have you seen a lot more interest and a lot more organizations sort of knocking on your door or proverbial door since the pandemic?
Yeah, I would say the need has definitely increased. You know, it is a very challenging time for people who live with mental illness and addiction. It's a challenging time for everybody, but, you know, it really compounds a lot of things. So early on in the pandemic, you know, the big challenge was how do we keep these people connected? Because isolation can be just catastrophic for somebody who lives with mental illness and addiction. So we started a campaign at that time, Be the Link, which essentially was to provide cell phones, SIM cards, mobile devices, internet connectivity for nonprofits and individuals living with mental illness and addiction, and even a number of patients who are currently inpatients in the Nova Scotia Hospital in Abbey Lane. So we were able to raise and distribute $75,000 worth of funding for that program. Wow. And some of the testimonials that came back were incredible, Joel. Like the difference that it makes to somebody to be able to get on the phone with their sister in a different part of the country. And, you know, I think all of us know what that feels like. having been trapped in our homes or locked in our homes for a certain amount of time and separated from those people who really make our life worth living.
I think I'm so glad to hear that. I mean, I think sometimes when we think about grants, we think about organizations applying for big, elaborate programs that are, you know, changing the world and these kinds of things. And that's great. And we certainly support that. But sometimes it's the little things like putting putting internet connectivity in somebody's hands who doesn't have it just makes all the difference in the world to that particular person. So, so what are some of the things, I mean, obviously, as you alluded to earlier, a lot of organizations apply. Everybody can't be successful all the time because there's a finite amount of funding. What are some of the things that you, as an organization generally, that you like to see and maybe don't like to see so much when you receive a proposal or application?
Let's start with the positive. We really, as I said, we'd really love to see something that addresses a unique need, something that's innovative, something that is going to really have an impact and make a difference. We love to see collaboration and partnership. So in some cases that could be, you know, an individual working with an organization or two organizations working together. Anything that empowers positive change and promotes reintegration for people who are living with mental illness and addiction and working so hard to get back into community and back into living their normal life. And that provides hope, because at the end of the day, that is the biggest thing for us, aside from raising funds, is ensuring that the money that we do invest into our community is in programs that are giving Nova Scotians who live with mental illness and addiction that feeling that they are going to get through this, that this is just a moment in time, this is just an illness, like, and that they will be able to have the tools to live with it and live an amazing life. And probably at some points in their lives, and days will go by, that they completely forget that they are living with an illness of any sort. And that's what we want at the end of the day, is for them to just be able to live a life that is happy, that is healthy. That's what all of us want. That's full of love and hope. So at the end of the day, having that ingredient of hope is essential and is really important. And I would also say anything that works to eradicate stigma. So anything that is educational and that really gets people, again, talking about mental illness. The conversation has changed a lot. We talked about that a little bit earlier. But there's still a lot of things that people misunderstand, or language that people misuse. So the more we can educate one another and get rid of that stigma that's still associated with mental illness and addiction in particular, you know, the better.
It's a really good point. I mean, it's a culture shift, and you know, it's about changing the way people think, not only necessarily sort of what they do. And I know it's been moving in that direction. I mean, I know there's been a lot of, you know, different organizations, you know, trying to sort of pull together in that general direction. Are there any things that, you know, I guess I'll preface this a little bit by saying, just having sat on a number of different not-for-profit boards and being sort of a little bit of a writer myself, I've found myself over the years in the position of being voluntold that I'm going to be the one who writes the grant application and all that sort of stuff. And, you know, sometimes have been successful, sometimes have not been successful. But I know that there's there's often a time pinch and a time crunch, and not everybody who makes a submission is a professional proposal writer or applicant, and there can be a rush to get things in, and sometimes the proposals are, you know, sometimes they hit the mark and sometimes they don't. Are there any things that you see, any trends or anything over time that you kind of look at and say, I wish more organizations maybe wouldn't do this, or maybe they would think a little bit more deeply about, you know, how to strengthen their proposal a little bit?
Yeah, I would say a couple things. You know, as we mentioned, Joel, unfortunately, we're not able to fund every project that comes in. And oftentimes we will see applications maybe the next year for the same project. I would say, don't copy and paste. If you're going to if you're going to apply the next time around, rethink it, reimagine, maybe add some more detail, a detailed budget, like detailed, that has numbers assigned to all of the expenses, and not just guesses, you know, so that doing that legwork, so a detailed budget. Yeah, and the other thing that I think really helps is testimonials, because having, I realize that in some cases these would be programs that are brand new, but if you're an organization and there you have clients that you work with who've been part of your programs in the past, who can speak to the quality of your work and the impact that it's had on your life, I don't think there's anything more powerful than a story from somebody saying that their life has been changed. So yeah, any kind of testimonial from a client, or even, you know, a partner organization to say, you know, this is a program that, you know, we think would be really valuable to us and our clients as well, or we really believe in this organization, and this is why. Those extra stories, they
go a
make
long way.
a difference, because that, you know, it's evocative, right? Those are the things that you remember because it has that sort of that impact, the emotional impact.
We don't always remember pie charts and graphs, but we remember the story that somebody told us about how their life completely changed for the better, for sure. Speaking of funding, are there certain things, or are there any, I mean, and I do know on your website, you do have a list of, I think, things you will fund and things maybe you won't fund. Are there any things that people get sometimes confused about with that, and they, you know, they show up with their application looking for funding for a certain aspect of their project that the foundation just as a rule doesn't fund, or are people pretty good about that? Or
I would say, like, one of the most important things is that, you know, we don't fund research. And oftentimes in this realm, you know, people are looking at that, and looking for funding for that. So we don't fund research, and we also don't fund like capital campaigns. So while it is, you know, having a place of work, or you know, a place for clients to come to, we understand that that's important. We're really looking at those programs, and those resources that people can access in their own communities, you know, in the South Shore of Nova Scotia, in Pictou County, in Guysborough County, so that, you know, they aren't isolated in their own community, so that, you know, in all of the areas across the province, you have access to some type of support.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you know, you mentioned several times about impact, and I think it's so, you know, it's so important. I know as granting organizations or as not-for-profits, when we're looking for funding, sometimes it's just we're really urgently needing funding, and it's sometimes easier to look at the inputs that we're putting in rather than the outputs or the impact that we're getting out. And one of the common themes among some of the other interviewees through this series has just been, we're really interested in knowing what's your impact going to be and how are you going to measure it. Is that important for the foundation in terms of, you know, if I'm writing a proposal to you, to be able to say, this is how I'm going to measure the outcome of what I'm doing?
Totally. And I think sometimes that can be challenging, you know, but if you can look at the number of people directly who are impacted, the number of people who indirectly are impacted, so that's their friends, their family members, you know, and also I think just if you can put your client or your program participant in the program, paint a picture of where they are at the beginning and what you want them to feel like at the end, I think that, you know, is probably a good way to showcase impact. It is challenging, right? Unless you've run the program before. But I think just identifying what it is that you want to achieve and how that will impact Nova Scotians living with mental illness and addiction, that, is vital. It's really important.
That's a really good point, and I hadn't really thought a lot about that, is that, you know, if you're an organization doing granting for say poverty, just use it as an example, I think sometimes we have whether for right or wrong, I think we have metrics that we generally tend to look at and say, well, okay, we moved the needle or we didn't. Mental health is very hard to measure. I mean, impact is always kind of, it is largely told through stories because that's how we sort of come to understand it. But it is a little bit more difficult, I can appreciate, to say, well, this is exactly, tangibly, measurably what the outcome is going to be. But on that thread, I wanted to ask you too, when you're assessing applications or proposals, is sustainability of the program or thing that you're funding important? Like, is it important for me to be able to say, if the foundation provides me X amount of dollars to do this, if you just help us get off the ground, then I will be able to do this in perpetuity? Or is that really a factor in your decision making?
It's certainly something we look at. Ideally we would love programs that can continue, but we're not going to say no to somebody who's obviously asking for funding because they need it, if there is a lifetime to the program. Sometimes it could just be part of a program. So something that comes to mind is Eating Disorders Nova Scotia. We provided them a grant for their peer mentoring program, and it was to train new mentors. So it was that specific little part of the program, right? So it's a program that they're already running. They can speak to the impact of the program, but they need more mentors to be able to continue to expand their reach, and also to be able to continue providing that support. So does that help? Like thinking that little bit part of program that's already going on, and sometimes it is just like, it is a project that may be a one-time thing. So we don't fund conferences, but there may be, we did fund an anti-stigma rally for high school students. So that's a one-time thing, right? It's not something that's going to continue. I mean, it could year over year. However, the impact of that program, for those students being involved for that entire day and being immersed in learning about mental illness and addiction, increasing their mental health literacy, having a better understanding and empathy for people who live with those challenges, that can have a huge impact, not just on the youth that attended, but their families, their school bodies when they go back. So as I said, it doesn't have to be something that's going to continue on, but we certainly want to see something. All comes back to impact.
And I think it's so great to see as well that, and this is another recurring theme that I've had throughout these interviews, is just how independent foundations and not-for-profit organizations can be so flexible. We know we have rules, we know we have, things that we're looking for and maybe things that we're not, but we're never completely closed off to, well, we didn't really think about this, but now that you've put this sort of in front of us, we can sort of use our judgment to say, well, this does fit, maybe we will do this once, and you sort of retain the ability to do that. Couple of more questions. I mean, you've talked, I think one of the things, I'll give you an opportunity to sort of put up a bit of a plug in here, because I think oftentimes the general public, and certainly not everybody, but some people look at organizations like the Mental Health Foundation of Nova Scotia and others and just assume they're government funded, or they get all their money from the sky or for somewhere else. And I know you do fundraising as an organization as well. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about it from that side. So if people were watching and they wanted to support the foundation, how do they do that, and what does that look like, and where does your funding sort of come from?
Right. That's a really good question on a number of levels. And I mean, when we're talking about the Mental Health Foundation of Nova Scotia, when people are looking for mental health support, they're looking for mental health. So often people will see the Mental Health Foundation of Nova Scotia and make an assumption that, that we're a program or a service provider, and we're not. We are a fundraising body. So we're the ones who are raising that money to give to the other programs. So sometimes there is that confusion. So our fundraising efforts are year round. Up until now, we've relied quite heavily on 2 signature events. So the Festival of Trees, which happens in a couple months, which we're having to reinvent. And then also in March, we have a different stage of mind. So these events are really long running. And they're a big part of our fundraising year over year. But we also have a lot of smaller things too. And I would have to say, through the past 6 months, we have seen an incredible amount of community members, small businesses, just wanting to do something, knowing and recognizing the impact the pandemic is having on Nova Scotians who live with mental disorders and saying, I want to do something. So, I can think of some musicians who've hosted concerts for us. The Stanfields actually created a song for us and then sold it by donation and donated all of the proceeds to us. There's a little business in Halifax called Ana and Zac, and they created masks in partnership with swimwear, and they used the scrap fabric and created masks, sold them for $20 a piece, and they've done 3 fundraisers, and each time have sold out and donated $2,000 each time to the Mental Health Foundation of Nova Scotia.
Wow, that's
so
amazing.
Little things like that, right? Like just people wanting to do something different. And, it could be also somebody just collecting change. Like that's, to me, sometimes the most beautiful things are when we have somebody walk into the office with, a mason jar full of change and they've done what they can because they want to make a difference. So whether it's a small contribution or a large one, all of that provides hope. Right?
That's awesome.
At the end of the day, we do raise funds, whether it's a small amount or a large amount. But so there's a number of different ways that we raise funds. We also really rely on monthly donors. That makes a huge difference. So you can make a one-time donation for an event, or if you're purchasing something from a fundraiser, but having people who commit month after month. Maybe instead of purchasing your, I don't know if people get out as much for their daily coffee, but, instead of maybe buying, I don't know what do people buy now?
Their daily, we could have, if we'd have had this conversation pre-pandemic, it would have been different, but I know exactly what you mean. And
it's just sort of putting that money aside, whether, $20 a month can make a huge difference. So monthly donors are really important, and legacy giving. We see a lot of memorial and tribute giving, which is beautiful, but it's also, the reality of the organization that we run.
I think it's a testament to the impact that you have, because I think, Nova Scotia is not a big place. I mean, in the grand scheme of things. And I think, one of the things I'm sure you find as a foundation is that, when you impact, everybody knows somebody who has been impacted, by this issue. And when you know somebody, it's kind of like the IWK. I mean, if everybody knows somebody who's had a child who's there, and when you see the impact that has, it makes it a lot easier for you to sort of open your wallet and say, well, I'm going to do the monthly donation, or I'm going to do something. And like I said, Nova Scotia is less than 1 million people, and it doesn't take long, and you don't have to go very far to know somebody who's been helped in some way by all of this. So.
Well, 1 in 5, Joel, is the number that we say. That's what we know as a statistic. But we also know that with mental illness and addiction, it often goes unreported. So it's probably more like 2 in 5. So that's, 400,000 Nova Scotians.
Well, exactly. There you go.
That are living with mental illness and addiction. Some of them struggling, but some of them living amazing lives. And I think for those who have, who've been through it, who live with it, and who have figured out a treatment plan that works for them, being on the other side, you recognize just how challenging that is for people, and especially those who don't have the resources or financial means to support.
That's right.
To get to counseling and medication and all of those sorts of things, which are a really vital part of recovering from that.
Exactly. So just before we wind down here, one more question. So if somebody's out there and I think sometimes, I'm sure you have organizations that you've probably worked with repeatedly over the years, but for the organization that's sort of out there and they have never had established contact with the Mental Health Foundation of Nova Scotia before, they're not really sure how to, they're maybe intimidated about, well, who do I talk to first? Can somebody contact you before, say, they submit a proposal, just to sort of have a conversation and say, look, we've got this idea. I'm not sure if it fits your criteria or not, but is there somebody available to do that with people, or?
Yes, by all means. You know, and I myself have responded to some of those. I can think of one in particular where they emailed and they had questions about this program that they were planning. And then we set up a phone call and we chatted on the phone, and they did end up actually being a successful applicant.
Excellent.
So doing that legwork to understand if it is the right match really helps. We do have a woman that works with me, Sherry Topple, my colleague,
Okay.
who is our grants lead. So she can answer a lot of questions about that. And you can reach her easily, info@mentalhealthns.ca. But if you go to the website, you can find her direct email quite easily as well.
And that sort of leads into my next question. What is your URL? I should know what that is. I think it's, I'm sure if you can just Google Mental Health Foundation.
I was going to say, take a stab, but mentalhealthns.ca.
.ca, perfect.
And if you're looking for us on social media, it's @mentalhealthns.
Are you more active on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, any of the above, all of the above?
We're on all of the above, but I would say Facebook is probably the go-to
place. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So just before we end here, anything else at all that you would like to, as you think about where the foundation is going in the coming years, and as you think about the needs in Nova Scotia, anything else that you'd like would-be applicants to know about or think about at all that we haven't touched on already?
Good question. You know, I think I would say we talked a little bit about the geography, and that's one thing, right? Reaching people throughout the province. But I think if you can also, if you have programs that identify a unique need for a specific population, you know, there are a number of populations within our province who experience mental illness and addiction at an increasingly higher rate than the average Nova Scotian. So whether that be the Indigenous population, people of color, Black Nova Scotians, members of the 2S LGBTQ community, you know, identifying that, yes, I am also providing a service for these people who need this additional support. I think that's also another really poignant thing to point out on your application.
Good. Thank you for that. And I'm sure that, you know, I'm sure that while your foundational vision and mission sort of remain fairly unchanged over the years, probably as the years go on, slightly different priorities come into and out of, you know, out of your plan, depending on where we are at and who's needing what and all that sort of thing. So I've always put a big plug in for that. Anybody who's going to be an applicant, read the organization's strategic plan, find out, you know, sort of find out what they're about, find out what their current priorities are, and find out and think about whether you know, what you're trying to do sort of fits into that or doesn't. So,
and Joel, just to add, I would just say, like, make it timely, right? So like you said, priorities may shift year over year. You know, if we think about this year and the challenges that Nova Scotians are facing, you know, I immediately think of Colchester County, you know, and so that's certainly something that the selection committee would keep in mind, that there may be a population within our province who needs a little bit extra support.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, I know we could talk about this for a long time and we still wouldn't scratch the surface of everything, but I'd like to thank you, Jill, for joining me today and for telling us not only about the work that you do, but how community groups can access the Foundation's grants and programs. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for this opportunity and the conversation. It's great, Joel.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you for joining. So once again, that's Jill Chappell, Marketing and Communications Lead with the Mental Health Foundation of Nova Scotia. And I would like to thank everybody for watching, wherever you are and whenever you are. Thank you for watching. Please remember to check out some of the other videos in this series from some of the other great organizations, and we'll see you soon. Bye for now.